Shabbat Shalom. Famously, this week's portion is called Parashat Kedoshim because among its opening words are the command, Kedoshim Tihiyu, you shall be holy. So those of you who are in coffee and commentary explored one meaning of that phrase. What does it mean to be kadosh? What does it mean to be holy? If you read the text of our portion, you get an idea. People who are kedoshim are people who behave in a certain way in their lives. People who are honest in business. People who have integrity in their personal relationship. People who are kind and thoughtful in their words and interactions with each other. People who live the right way, whether they are in the boardroom or the bedroom. People who are kind and charitable. People who love their neighbor. There is, however, a second meaning to the word kedoshim. In Hebrew, kedoshim can also be used to refer to those who have sanctified God's name in death as martyrs. So that meaning is one that particularly comes before us on this particular Shabbat, framed as it is between two observances. So last week we observed Yom HaShoah, the commemoration, the memorial of 6 million Jews who were murdered in the Holocaust. And then beginning on Sunday night, we'll observe Yom HaZikaron, Israel's Memorial Day. Remember those who were murdered, those who perished, those who gave their lives in the wars of Israel, and those who were murdered in attacks of terror. So we have these two different meanings of this word kedoshim that is the framing of our portion this week. And in some ways, they are two sides of the same coin. You can think of kedoshim in terms of how we are close to God and how we live, or we can think about the word kedoshim in how we come close to God even at that moment of death. So I want to offer some thoughts today about martyrdom. So as Jews, we tend to joke about being a martyr. So, for example, how many Jewish mothers does it take to change a light bulb? None. I'll just sit in the dark. Different faith traditions have different approaches to this question. So, Christianity very much has the idea that one might die in a public display of faith. If you go to any church in Europe, there is a relic of someone who gave their life, of a saint, and there is a finger bone, there is a piece of their garment that is preserved to remind us that they died rather than betray their faith. And in fact, if you go back, the essence of Christianity is that it is about an individual's sacrifice. In contrast, there is also an idea of martyrdom in Islam. Islam is a very diverse faith tradition. In some sects, in some groups, it's the highest form of sacrifice, and someone who engages in martyrdom is called a shaheed, a witness. For most of the history of Islam, the meaning of the word shaheed was someone who died rather than betray their faith. Similar to that in Christianity. However, in the last 50 years or so, there was a different meaning that emerged. Even though Islam as a faith normally condemns suicide, there was a branch started in Iran that came up with a new word, ishtihad, which is someone who dies in the process of killing others in name of the faith. And that has become a trend that we have seen in the last 50 years among some segments of the Islamic world, directed against Jews, directed against Christians, and by the way, just as much directed against fellow Muslims. And perhaps the idea here, the reason why this idea has gained so much credence, it is the promise that it does not matter how you live, only how you die. That you can live if you feel guilty because for the first 36 years of your life you did not follow the Quran. Well, guess what? We've got a get out of hell free card. all you have to do is take some infidels with you. And so when I look at the news this week, so Israel has called upon, they're sending letters, cell phones, spam texts. If you are in this part of Rafah, get out of the way we are coming in. And I actually heard a recording of a call, and, telemarketers, what are you going to do? But in this case, it's, look, we are coming into your neighborhood, please get out. And the response is, no, we will stay, I and my children will be martyrs. That's a long way from, don't worry, I'll just sit in the dark. So that is not our way. Woody Allen, the Jewish comedian, has sort of a complicated legacy, but there are some words he shared that I think are illustrative. He said, I don't want to achieve immortality through my work. I want to achieve immortality through not dying. I don't want to live on in the hearts of my countrymen. I want to live on in my apartment. So we as Jews have a complicated relationship with martyrdom ourselves. For generations past, it was a horrific but essential fact of life. A few weeks ago, we recited the Yizkor service, and according to many ideas, the Yizkor service, which we now say for our relatives who passed away, God willing, in old age, was originally instituted as a prayer of remembrance for martyrs, for those who were murdered because they were Jews. Because martyrdom is generally something that Jews don't choose, it is generally something that is thrust upon us. Martyrdom means choosing to be the victim rather than the aggressor. It means refusing to give up one's identity. So a classic story is that of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was a famous sage. So the famous sage, Rabbi Akiva, we are told, passed away. He was being tortured by the Romans, refused to renounce his faith. The words on his lips, his last breath, were the words of the Shema, Shema Yisrael. But I would point out that martyrdom was not something that he sought out, that he hid from the Romans first. It was only when he was captured that he said, I will not give up my faith, even if it means giving up my life, but I'd rather have both. There's the famous story of Masada, where Jews, even after Jerusalem fell, were on the top of this desolate mountain in the middle and said, we would rather die than be taken to Rome as slaves. There's also the story of Josephus Flavius. Flavius Josephus was a Jewish general, and he was captured he was in a group in a cave, and they were surrounded by the Roman army. And the Romans said, surrender, but they refused. And Josephus, the account we are told, the group decided we will take our own lives rather than be taken by the Romans. And so they drew lots, and one by one took each other's lives. And then it came down to Josephus, and he said, wait, I have a new plan. And he ended up surrendering to the Romans, telling the story of the revolt and being one of the most important Jewish historians, and really explaining the story. There is so much that we only know about the history of that time because Josephus wrote and gave our perspective. It was not just the Romans who told the story, but he managed to tell the tale. So in our Jewish faith, how does one choose whether to live or to die? Often the choice is not given to us. When Jews were lined up in the ghetto, they were not given a choice which way they wanted to go. They were told. But sometimes we do choose. So our tradition says that under all circumstances, there are certain situations where you must accept death rather than sin. One is one may not kill an innocent person to save one's own life. Another is that one may not commit rape to save one's own life. That's the premise, I think, of the movie Seven. One may not worship an idol to save one's own life. Next week in Parshat Emor, the verse says, V'nikdashti b'toch b'nei Yisrael. God says, I will be sanctified amidst the people of Israel. And so there is another question. If you are called upon in public to deny your faith, if you are called upon in public to violate a commandment, what should you do? And the rules are complex, and it's sort of funny. If you learn from a doctor that the best medicine to save your life comes from something that is not kosher, there is no question any rabbi, no matter how big the hat, no matter how long the beard, would tell you that if there is something non-kosher that will save your life from an illness, you take it. But on the other hand, if someone comes to you in front of the community, in front of the world, and says, violate this commandment, violate Shabbat, do not eat something that is unkosher, to show that you reject your faith, in that moment you are supposed to stand up and say, even for this, I would rather die than be forced to reject who I am and what I believe. The rules are actually a little bit more complex than that. So I don't know if anyone has the presence of mind as the oppressors come near. Hold on, let me check with my rabbi on that one. I need to look at the rules. Wait, I don't remember what the blessing is. Let me look. Let me get my siddur. I'll be back in like 10 minutes. But we are here in this moment, in this time of year, where as Jews, the question of martyrdom is before us. So we just remembered Yom HaShoah, where there were people who, for the most part, had no choice. Given the opportunity, they would have chosen to live, but they were marched to their deaths. They were shot, they were burned, they were gassed. They had no option. And coming up on Sunday night, I will be part of a community-wide observance, Yom HaZikaron. Those who knew, as they put on uniforms, as they took up arms, that their goal was not necessarily to kill the enemy, was not to give up their own life, but to save the lives of those they loved, to protect their towns, their villages, their fields, their homes. And if that meant giving up their lives, then so be it. But that was the worst, not the best case. Judaism is a religion that understands that martyrdom is sometimes unavoidable, that sometimes we have no choice but to die for who we are, but that its core values life. We have a culture that values life so much that, in fact, Israel sometimes, in choosing its operational strategies, will risk the life of its own soldiers to reduce casualties on the other side. And the challenge is that it is fighting a sect, a militant group that values death over life. And not only that, imposes that view on their own people, whether they subscribe to it or not. It is a group that shoots missiles at the checkpoint through which their humanitarian aid is supposed to come. And so I cannot understate not just the practical challenge, but the ethical challenge, the moral challenge that Israel faces at this moment when one is in a conflict where the rules are different on each side of the fence. When the values that one is looking at, when you are fighting against an enemy that is actually working in the worst interests, not just of your people, but its own. Kedoshim Tihiyu, our portion says. As we live our lives, I pray that we are never faced with the choices faced by martyrs of old, by generations of Jews that had to wonder if they were going to have to die for their faith. And I pray that those who are in danger are relieved of the control of a terrorist organization that which is the same for them. But I would encourage each of us to think in this moment that if something is worth dying for, surely it is worth living for. Rabbi Akiva, the great sage, died as a martyr with the words of the Shema on his lips. There's this tradition that the Shema are the last words on one's lips in one's life. Let those words be familiar. Let them be the last words on one day that leads into another blessed one. There are ancestors, there are friends, there are people we remember who had to give up everything, home and possessions and family. We can give up a little ill-gotten gain, a little undeserved profit, in order to be known as Kedoshim, in order to be known as holy, as good, as worthy of God's blessing. There are those who gave up their family. There are those who submitted to the ultimate indignities because of who they were. Let us remember that when we are called upon to resist temptation and have integrity in the lives of our families and our intimate relationships. Kedoshim Tihiyu, it is possible to be holy in death. It is possible to, in one moment, lose everything in life, but at the same time gain eternity, and that is martyrdom. But it is perhaps just as good and maybe even better to live a life that is worth living, to live a life of holiness, to live a life of integrity, to live a life of kindness and charity, of honesty, of goodness, of caring, because that is what our portion says is best. To live a life whose goal is not death, but life. Shabbat Shalom.